Hi everyone, Azriel Knight here, and welcome to another episode of Days of Night. Now before I get started, I want to tell you about a contest I'm running for the month of April. All you have to do is join my monthly newsletter, the link is in the description, and on May 1st I will draw a random person to receive one of my 2020 box sets. This box set contains 7 limited edition 5x7 darkroom prints. On to the meat of the episode though. Today I'm going to give you my first impressions on the Nikon S2 rangefinder camera. This camera was released in 1954, so a long time ago. Most of the cameras that I deal with are between the 1970s and the 2000s. But this one's over 60 years old, so you know that it's going to be pretty different than what you normally see on this channel. Also, you don't see a lot of rangefinders around here, so there is that as well. I'm not against rangefinders, I just don't come across them very often. I was able to borrow this camera from the Film Experience camera store in Longview, Alberta, and as soon as I took it home, I knew I was going to have to read the manual before even trying to load the film. This camera is beautiful, it is stylish and compact, it is not user-friendly, but is it worth it? Let's find out. Now before I show you where I went to test out this camera, I should give you a rundown on some of its features, just in case you were thinking about picking one up for yourself. There are definitely a few things that you should know, especially if you're like me and you're not used to rangefinder cameras. The biggest thing for me was loading the film the first time I actually failed. It's really quite different than what you might be used to if you're shooting normally with SLR cameras. First thing that you want to do is to make sure that this dial here is set from R to A. Next thing you want to do is wind the advance lever. After that, you're going to want to pull up on this tab and turn this knob all the way to open. You're going to grip it firmly and slide this back panel right off. Now I'm just using a dummy roll here, don't worry, I'm not going to shoot with Ilford XP2 Super. But you want to place the film roll inside, pull the film all the way across here, get it nice and snug in the uptake slot. And then close everything up. Then you're going to want to advance a couple of times, making sure that this rotates as you do it. That's how you know that it's caught. And finally, you will set your shutter count to 0 by lining up the 0 with this little black mark right there. Now here are a couple of other things that you should definitely know about this camera. This shutter dial here is a real oddball. It's actually 2 separate dials, one for slow speeds and one for high speeds. And to use one, the other one has to be at 1/30th of a second. And to change speeds on the top end, you need to lift this dial and rotate. And to change speeds on the bottom end, you use this lever. Your shutter speed will need to be lined up with this arrow for high speeds and this arrow for low speeds. Because it's not an SLR, you're not seeing what your framing is going to be. You'll get a window which will give you an approximate result, and the closer you get to your subject, the less accurate it's going to be. This here is a lens locking mechanism, and it was super annoying for me, just like on a previous rangefinder I owned for a while, the Kiev 4. So when your lens gets to infinity, it will lock into place. So if you're the kind of person who focuses by racking back and forth, if you're shooting anything near infinity, it's just going to snap into place on you, and then you're going to need both hands, one to pull the tab and the other to rotate the lens. And of course, no light meter. You'll need a handheld one, or in my case, I used the Reveni Labs light meter, which was super handy. I am so glad for this thing. It is tiny, it was unobtrusive, it did not take away from the stylings of the camera in my opinion, or any of its workflow. So yeah, to test the Nikon S2, I went downtown, and let's take a look. All right, the water was still a little purple, but what can you do? I'm not gonna waste a 4-liter jug on one roll of film, even if the water is a little bit purple. Someone told me, you know, the water doesn't have to be 100% clear when you're doing your final rinse, and I've lived by that, and I haven't noticed any adverse effects. So yeah, let's have a look at this and see how it turned out. Now I'm a little nervous because I relied entirely on my Reveni Labs light meter, and I also have never shot with this Nikon before, but you know, it'll probably be fine. Yeah, these look great. These look great. I am really curious to see how these look. I'm going to hang them up to dry, and then I'm going to scan them. No waiting for you though. Here are today's highlights and my contact sheet. I hope you enjoyed those highlights. I have to say that I'm very happy with the results. Of course, I used my favorite film, Acros. Yeah, if Acros wasn't so expensive, I would use it way more often. This was actually one of the rolls of original Acros before it was discontinued. So it's probably expired by a couple of years, but that shouldn't make a difference. And I overall really love this camera. I think that there are a lot of things that make it complicated to use, but I feel like if this was like my main camera, I would just get used to it. As you can see, I spent most of my time shooting this abandoned fire hall, which was unfortunately turned into a budget car rental at some point. But now, as far as I know, it's just empty. There's no signage on the outside. There doesn't seem to be anybody in there. And yeah, when I was taking a walk downtown, I snapped a few random shots, and then I came across the building. And I've walked past it 1,000 times before, but I've usually only taken one frame and I've just moved on. But today, though, I seemed inspired by it. I wanted to really focus on getting it from as many angles as possible. Maybe that's because it's abandoned. Maybe when a building is empty, I'm kind of like, okay, it's on its last legs. The next stop is demolition. Now, despite all these, I don't want to call them shortcomings, but it's the only word that comes to mind. The clumsiness of changing the shutter by lifting and rotating, not being able to see what the lens sees, so having to compensate for that, which I'm not good at. I had a really great time with this camera, and at the end of the day, it's the results that are what matter. And Acros carried some of those results. Again, favorite film, I love it. It's just really expensive, but that lens and the camera has to take credit for it as well. Besides me, of course. I mean, you don't take great pictures, you make great pictures. But shooting with different cameras on a week-to-week basis, you tend to pick up on certain things. And when the results are significantly better from one week to the next, you have to give credit where credit's due. And in this case, that lens, that camera, and the film, they all played a part. And I think that now that I've shot with the camera once, if I were to shoot with the camera like that again, I would do things differently. For example, I'd be more inclined to change my aperture more often than the shutter speed when adjusting for my exposure. I might be more inclined to use a handheld light meter to really nail my exposure. The Reveni Labs did a great job, but I noticed that it was off a couple of times, and I'm not saying I was off because of Reveni Labs. I'm saying that was probably more human error. I kept snapping away, and I didn't double check my lighting. Sun could have come out of the clouds, or I could have shifted my composition just enough. The real question is would I recommend this camera? It's hard to recommend a camera like this. The ticket price is almost $1,000 depending on where you go. And so my immediate knee-jerk reaction is to say there are plenty of cheaper cameras out there for you to try. It's really about the film and the skill set, I believe, before anything else. I think your skill set plays a bigger part than anything else. And I do see a lot of people out there with very expensive cameras taking very mediocre shots because they thought the camera would solve their problems. But hey, if you got the money to blow and you want a rangefinder camera, I would say this is one of the better ones I've tried. And I've probably only shot with, I don't know, half a dozen at the very most. But this is so far the most memorable, besides the Kiev 4, which is the most stylish, but super clunky in my opinion. But yeah, that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, maybe you'll consider joining me on Patreon. On my Patreon, I offer things like early access, your name in the credits, free prints, and more. Go to patreon.com/Azriel to subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter. And until next time, stay classic.